So welcome back. Been doing a little bit more detail on this. Got a bit more undulation in the leaf, a bit more ups and downs, and I've marked in the fine veins. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit now about some different types of gouges. One of them is called a veiner, or some people will call it a veiner. Now, what this is, it's a veiner. Is this one here. It has higher sides than an ordinary gouge, and it's good for getting into deeper recesses without the corners of the tool fouling in the wood and lifting grain up that you don't want it to. Very useful tool is the veiner. I'm going to use a very small one now. It's a 3mm number 11 sweep. So I'm going to come either side of these lines that I put in. Now, obviously, very important to make sure that your tools are very sharp when you're doing this kind of work. And don't be too worried about crossing over the line that you've done and cutting through the vein. All you need to do is just go a little bit deeper and you can recover quite easily. Often with carving, you got a few more bites at the cherry, so to speak, than you might initially think. A lot of my students in the past have started off being very fearful of removing too much wood. Removing too much wood is just as bad as removing not enough. And I would favour that people learnt and improved. And the only way to do that is to really get stuck in there and give it a go. So, I haven't gone as close as I'm going to go to those lines straight off. I'm just sort of roughing them in, and then that gives me the opportunity of coming alongside them in a little bit and creeping even closer to the final line that I want. But you can see here how useful this very small gouge, this small veiner is for going either side of the veins of this leaf. Now, once I've dropped down either side, obviously I need to remove the wood that's filling this area here. So what I'd need there is a smaller gouge, really. This one would be a bit too big. I could do quite a bit with that, I suppose. Again, being a fishtail, I can get the corner of it in, and I can get that pretty close to the sides of those veins, and the same that side. Drop that down, that bit there, and that will leave those veins proud. We don't want them as divots into the leaf. They're actually proud, positive marks. They're not just simply grooves in the wood. This is doing the job okay, but a smaller tool might be useful at some point. There. As you can see, I've switched to a smaller tool for sorting out the area between the veins on this leaf. And this is actually one of my favourite little tools, actually. It's a very small fishtail gouge, and it's very good for getting into these little areas. One of the problems with fishtail gouges is they do have a limited lifespan because of the shape. I'll just use this one here. As you sharpen this, it will get shorter and shorter and shorter over a period of time, and of course the width of the tool will get narrower and narrower as it goes on. With the straight-sided tools, obviously the longevity is much greater with those than with a fishtail, but there's good and bad points on both sides really. Now this could be a sanded piece maybe. I'm just going to tool it, and I'm going to leave the final tool marks to give the impression of the very, very fine veins that you have in a leaf such as this. And obviously being this is just a relief carving, I'm going to undercut it to a degree, and the undercutting is very important because that creates lots of shadow and elevates the piece from the background. Undercutting, I'd probably start off with something like a V-tool, just laid on its side. So I'm putting the one side of the V-tool flat against the base, and just start the process of getting under there. Now what can often happen, sometimes people like to go around a relief carving, hammering around the outside to give the outline, but you have very little control over how deep the tool goes. And then when it comes to undercutting, you can discover where the tool has gone too deep initially. It leaves a cut line in the wood that's visible once you've started undercutting underneath the leaves. So that's why I like to go around the outside edge with a V-tool, because there's no chance of accidentally going too deep. Now once I've gone so far with the V-tool, I would switch to some kind of a knife. Again, started off just laid flat on its side and scoring under there. And then very important when you're using a knife in this way and you're undercutting something, that you don't again overshoot the cut and leave a long-term mark in the wood beyond where you want to be. So that comes out there quite nicely. Another type of knife that I use a lot for this sort of job is a scalpel, and these are very nice because the blade is extremely thin and it doesn't push the fibres of the wood apart, it cuts through the fibres, especially where you have an area like this little stem here. I want to undercut it a bit. In fact, I want to go right the way through at the point where it lifts up at that point there, and the grain of the wood is running this direction, which is completely wrong really. I want it ideally running that way, as it will give much more strength to that piece there, but it's perfectly possible to do it this way around. And what you have to be careful of is when you're dealing with short areas where you're going across the grain, it can split the wood out very easily. So using something that cuts the fibres as opposed to something that acts more like a wedge is a definite advantage. Yeah. Now, getting back onto the tools, with that set that I've sort of run through there, you can carve an awful lot with those. Some slightly more unusual tools that I do own but are very, very rarely used are ones like this. This is some kind of a back bent skewed gouge. I've used it very rarely, but when I've used it, it's come in handy for getting round the back of something, but it's not the be all and end all of having a tool like that. And as for this one here, I don't think I've ever used it. One day there may be some use for that one, but yeah, it's not worth wasting your money buying large sets of tools. I find it much better if you have a few tools and then build up your collection as you decide or you discover which ones you actually get on with and which ones you actually need. That one was bought many years ago, before I really understood what it was that I actually needed for carving. very basic set you can do an awful lot with.